be learners, have that attitude of curiosity. And so one of the first things, one of the simplest steps when it comes to apologetics is find a way to say that that question is worth asking.
Mm.
And there's a lot of different ways you can do that, of course, and it depends on the question, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist or have, 4 degrees in ministry and theology, philosophy and apologetics. You don't have to have all of that if you are willing to encourage your kids asking good questions and walk with them in finding answers, which comes up next. We'll talk about that in a second. But mainly, I would say most of the work in apologetics revolves around this issue of dignifying the question, because you're not just talking to a floating head in the abstract realm where ideas are clashing into each other. It's person to person.
Right.
And people have feelings, people have intentions, people have attitudes. And by dignifying the question, you are in part dignifying the person, letting them know, I hear you. But there's no limit to how many different ways we could dignify the question. We could say, that's a good question, or I'm glad you asked, or why do you ask that? That's an interesting thought. What made you curious about this? These let them know that you're not dismissing the question and so dismissing them.
Great stuff. Great. I know this can be difficult because kids ask a lot of questions. It's fault because the way we learn is by asking questions. I often think of this book called The 307 Questions Jesus Asked and the 3 Questions He Answered. And Jesus, the one who knew all the answers, chose as his primary method of engagement to ask questions. And the way you learn about, even if you're dating somebody, you learn about them by asking questions. And so questions are how we grow, how we gain knowledge. And obviously, no one needs to gain more knowledge than our young people. So we can't be, I'm talking to myself too, we can't be turned off or frustrated by their questions. As you said, John, we got to dignify their question, do our best to answer it, but also be honest about if we can't answer it, or at least answer it at that moment.
That's a really important point. I think a lot of times apologetics gets this reputation of we're all about the answers. We are the answer people. We have all the answers. Bring your questions to us, oh feeble peasant, and we in our magnanimity will wield our intelligence in ways that will amaze and impress you. And that's totally getting off base, because it's a person-to-person relational dynamic where when we pretend to be, oh, I'm this all-purpose answer person, you come off condescending, you come off arrogant and rude and mean sometimes, instead of saying, wow, that's a good question. I think I've heard of something about this. Let me know what you think about this. And I can wield the same answer, but I'm wielding it in a way that is encouraging them to think it through and is asking for their feedback and their input. Now, that's in an answer situation. There are other times when you don't even have an answer. You're not sure. This is so out of left field. There's no way you could have predicted it. Are there going to be gorillas in heaven? Do robots have souls? These are clever questions kids can come up with. And sometimes just by talking about the question, asking where they're coming from, you might be able to deflate any doubt or fear that they're having about asking questions. And you're dignifying them. Sometimes the question doesn't really mean that much to them. And so even if you don't have an answer, it's not that important. But by engaging them personally and dignifying them in addressing the question, they feel safer in asking that in the future, or they even feel safer seeking answers. And you could say, wow, that's a great question. I never thought about that. Do you think you can look up some answers, and let's talk about that later? And I don't have to have the answer. And knowing that I don't have the answer, it's a huge weight off my shoulders. But
Absolutely.
knowing where we can go to find answers, that's helpful. That's really important.
Absolutely.
I think, and I've told audiences this, for every kid, Gen Z, especially between like 10 and 16 or 17, the number one thing they're facing is exactly what you just described. It's the radical gender theory that has completely removed purpose from gender and has disconnected gender from their sex, their biological sex. And it's just having devastating consequences. I won't get too off on that, but so the girl power thing. So if you think about feminism, right, at the beginning of feminism, like there were some good things going on. Women didn't have the right to vote. We couldn't own property. We couldn't go to college. I probably would have been marching along with them as well. It was dangerous for a woman. If the people in her life died, she couldn't inherit property. I mean, it's tough, right? So those were rights that needed to be advocated for, right? To protect women and to help women flourish. Well, that was kind of the first wave of feminism. And there were some, that was even split. The first wave was split. There were what they called the egalitarian feminists. And then I think they called them the matriarchal feminists. I may be wrong about that. But the egalitarian ones believed that men and women were interchangeable. Most of the feminists of that first wave were not egalitarian. They believed men and women were different, but just needed to have equal, rights or opportunities. Gotcha. And the second wave was around the time of the sexual revolution, right? So when women got all the things they wanted in the first wave, well, it was like, well, now with the sexual revolution, they're looking around going, well, a man can have sex and not have to take maternity leave or not have to lose his job or take a back seat in his corporate job. And when a woman has sex, she could end up having to be pregnant and all. So that it became about abortion rights and about workplace stuff. And then the third wave, of course, the pink hats and the Women's March. And we're like, how did we get from, look, I want to be able to vote to I'm wearing women's genitalia on my head, right? Like, how did we get there? Well, and in that third wave, and also there's like this fourth wave idea now too, but it was like, it was all about like, okay, the institutionalized oppression, because it was like, well, we got our right to abortion, we got all these rights, but women are still choosing to stay at home and be mothers, and so something's wrong. It must be the patriarchy, right? And that's when. So now it's like, because of modern feminism, what modern feminism is telling our girls is that anything men do that a woman can't or isn't allowed to do is oppression. Well. But the problem is it doesn't go the other way around. You don't, and I think I said this in the book, you don't see men rising up, marching, saying, how come we can't breastfeed? How come we can't bear children? I mean, why don't they value that? It's like, for some reason, it's flip-flop. We only value the things that men are doing. And then it creates impossible standards for girls. Yeah. And Alex, I think this is one of the reasons we're seeing the rapid onset gender dysphoria among young girls as a social contagion. Of course, I think you and I would both say that for anybody who has genuine gender dysphoria, like we used to see maybe very rare cases, we would have so much compassion and love for, and we'd want to minister to them and care for them. But now there's like this rapid onset where it's like a massive amount of girls that are being persuaded to go on puberty blockers and even have their breasts removed, and life-altering, irreversible damage being done to their bodies. And I think a lot of this is coming from this feminist message of like, hey, men and women are interchangeable. Well, if you say, let's just say, Alex, you say men and women are interchangeable in all ways. We all know that the average woman, yes, there are exceptions, but the average woman is not as physically strong as the average man. That's why we always used to say to guys, don't hit a girl. But now we're saying, oh, you guys are interchangeable. So we're seeing on TV shows, men and women getting into fist fights, a little 115-pound girl fighting a big 200-pound Navy SEAL, and she's flinging him all around the room. And what message is this sending, not only to girls, but to guys? Like, this is a fair fight, really? But that's the message of modern feminism, which I think is causing, when it's been documented that when little girls go on the testosterone, it makes them feel more powerful. The weight starts redistributing. It can be a very, very strong high for them because they feel more powerful. And I think this is so dangerous. And I think this is where all this is coming. When we're confused about who we are as gendered creatures, embodied gendered creatures, all manner of chaos, as we're seeing, is going to follow that.
Wow. Exposure, just seeing something different, just seeing, like when you don't know what professions or possibilities are out there, you don't know to think about those.
That's exactly right.
And my it's funny, my kids call me a dream killer, which in some ways, but it's because it's a bad dream. But
it depends on the dream.
You know, they come in. I'm like, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, if somebody says basketball or football player, I'm going to lose my. And it always happens, of course.
Sure.
Or a musician, but it's only because their view is so myopic.
That's what they're pumped for. That's what they're pumped for. That's what they're pumped in their minds. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Our media systems are just filling our minds with this is what's important. And, you know, good tube kids, we're never going to be YouTube or YouTube kids in a sense because we have a bigger mission, right? YouTube says you, right? That's the definition of what is important here. And, you know, I want kids to understand that goodness, right? Goodness, which is grounded in God, that's what's important.
Yeah.
And so we seek to live up to that standard, not our own standards. We seek to live up to that standard in what we do and what we show. And, you know, I know that I am not, and I just never will be or can't be the open mouth, open eyes, or yay. I just can't do it. But I still think, you know, I studied Mr. Rogers in a while during this buildup, and he said he wanted to give kids some peace, a little bit of respite from society, which at the time, which he believed was moving too fast for kids. And so he'd be rolling in his grave if he saw what we're doing now. And I want to do something similar, right? And if I could just continue on that, Mr. Rogers came and he went and he made a huge impact in his life, but that impact is slowly waning, right? We don't see as many kids that are familiar with Mr. Rogers, or that, you know, they still have Daniel Tiger and some of these things that live on.
Yeah.
But the anchor that was Mr. Rogers and his faith, you know, a seminarian, a man ordained into the ministry of children's media, that's fading away a bit. And so let's reinvigorate that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, one thing that we export is our culture.
Rapidly and strongly.
Right? And so, you know, if we don't change that culture here, at least put dents in it, then we're going to keep exporting crap.
Yeah, it's true.
For lack of a better term.
Well, so many people, I'm sorry to interrupt. So many people have said, we need to get back in the fight. We need to get in the fight. We can't stand by. If we look at Disney, YouTube, Netflix, Discovery, we look at the number of subscribers, the amount of money that we're giving to them. We are enabling, and I'm not castigating anything on parents. You know, we still buy Disney movies because a lot of the classics are still good movies. They're still whole movies. It was from a different generation of Disney. And so we are still, though, I think it's become easy. This is what we give. We give to Disney. We give to Netflix. 76 million subscribers, 160 million subscribers at $10, $12 a month.
Right.
And then we turn and we look at maybe some Christian movies and we say, well, why aren't they of the same caliber? Why don't they have the same CGI, or why don't they have the same script writing? And it's not because the people aren't capable. Their vision is different, right? I think a lot of times they're focused on communicating this goodness and truth. And is it Mike Winger? He said Christians need to put good effort into what they're doing, right? Good. We need to make something that's also appealing. And I understand with Good Tube Kids, we're going to go through generations and to continue to get better and try to make sure that we make a something that's kids want to consume.
Right.
But on the other hand, like I've said to parents, if you're at the carnival and you have a plate of steak and mashed potatoes and some vegetables, and everything else is candy corn and cotton candy and funnel cakes, it's hard to compete with that because they don't care if you get cavities, right?
Right.
But your parents want you to be nourished and nurtured. And so that's with Good Tube Kids. I'm not making an excuse right off the bat. I'm just saying that in that intentional persistence, discipline in love is love. And so, you know, I've had to tell my son, no, you just can't watch that. I'm just sorry, because there's things you're not ready for. And I'll give one last story on that. My sweet son just slid a note, I think, saying good luck to me under my door. So, so in law enforcement, I'll give this example. In law enforcement, when you are moving down a hallway in let's say an active shooter scenario, something terrible that we all know. When you stand with your brother, and I said this in the sermon, you stand side to side. We both have rifles. You're guarding me. I'm guarding you, and we're taking on this hallway. But if I have somebody important, maybe a doctor or somebody with the keys, like the key maker in the Matrix, remember, right? I need to protect that person. They don't have the armor and the firearms. And so we form a wedge. And we form this wedge here so that nothing gets to them without going through us.
Right.
That is how we have to parent our children. Form the wedge. And so often, because we're busy, we're living parallel. Mom and dad, and child and child and child, all on their own devices. And not because we're bad parents, but because it's hard. That intentional persistence is exhausting, right? Fortunately, Philippians 4:13. But form that wedge and protect our children from seeing something so they don't have to have that awkward conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, awkward conversation. One other thought on this is, the schools that our kids go to, by and large, and even private schools, not a guarantee of anything, but and this is also why it's important to make sure we're engaging in conversation with our young people and not just assuming that they're getting something just because we take them to church, because we don't always know what's going on in their head. And so when they say something and it just sounds maybe a little off, maybe a little pluralistic, universalistic, or something like that, not that they understand it that way, but you understand it that way, then that's say, what made you say that way? What'd you just say? And give an answer. So what I'll often do is we'll sit, open the Bible. I'll say, like, this is what we think. This is why. Does this make sense to you? If it was the other way, would that make sense to you? And I'm asking questions, allowing her to determine in her own mind, yes, this is what I've heard, but does that actually make sense? Does it actually make sense that something can come from nothing? Now, I'm not going to break down the cosmological argument with her, but I can say, hey, mommy and daddy made you, right? You didn't just pop into existence. Like, very simple examples to help her kind of work through logic or illogic of some things that are being presented.
That's a really good point. A question well asked can do a lot of the work of our whole intellectual project, trying to grow, trying to learn, trying to be lifelong students. If we can ask good questions and get good at it, then we can kind of deflate unreasonable doubts. We can get closer to answers just by asking it right. So if instead of just swallowing what authorities feed them, which parents like to do this when the kids are really young, and it makes sense, you're trustworthy and you aren't trusting that child in just anybody's hands. But as they grow older, they're going to have to learn more mature skills, like how to discern good from bad authority, how to discern when a teacher is telling the truth versus mixing it with some lies. And so this swallow whatever authorities feed you mentality might work when you're 1 year old, 2 years old. But as they're getting into kindergarten and first grade and older, they need to have a few working discernment principles in place, and asking a good question and not just swallowing and trusting can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.